Hi, I'm Pastor Michael Schmidt. Welcome to Bible Study. Today for Bible Study, we're going to be taking a bit of a different turn in our favorite characters or stories of the Bible series that we are currently working through. And we're going to focus on 3 characters today, believe it or not. But they're actually never mentioned in the Bible. Well, let me rephrase that. They never speak in the Bible. In fact, they're never around Jesus or anyone else in the New Testament. They are kind of the overseers, the men behind the curtain that are truly directing things, or so they think, as we'll see. We are actually going to be looking at 3 instances in Scripture today where Caesar is the character at work. Israel finds itself during the New Testament under Roman rule. The Caesars are, of course, in Rome, sitting upon their thrones, ruling the world. And even though they never come into contact, we never hear them speak or see their faces in the New Testament, we can see that the threat of Caesar, the power of Caesar, is always at work. It's always around. It's always playing some role in what's going on. And that's what we'll be looking at today, the effect that Caesar has on the events of the New Testament. So I said there were 3 Caesars. There's Caesar Augustus. He is probably the most famous because he, of course, is the one in Luke chapter 2. In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. Well, there you go. There's Caesar right there. But that's the only mention by name Caesar gets. When Jesus is on the cross in John 19, when Jesus is on trial in John 19, Pilate fears that the Jews will go to Caesar and kind of complain about him, and he will get in big trouble. So Caesar there influences those events. And then in Acts 25, Paul appeals to Caesar to go and to plead his case before Caesar. Well, that's Nero is the Caesar at that point. So we see that the person or the character of Caesar is always around, but we'll see how much influence they actually have, or what influence they actually have. Quite appropriate today, as yesterday was election day. And on election day, we go to the polls to elect our own Caesars, our own earthly authorities and rulers who will oversee us. Quite a fitting comparison, there's a lot of debate. We talk about elections as though this is the most important election ever in the history of the world. And yet, how much is your life going to change based on whoever was elected? Your taxes might change, and that's where most of us see the greatest effect is in our taxes. But in terms of our day-to-day life, it's probably the same on November 2nd as it is November 4th. In January, when the president is inaugurated, he can sign a bunch of executive orders. He can say he's going to do all kinds of stuff. But that takes time, and it's kind of a trickle down. It's not always going to reach us immediately. Some of it may. Some of what Caesar himself does, sitting in Rome, does have an effect on the day-to-day lives of those in Israel, but not as much as we sometimes claim to think. So, Luke chapter 2, verses 1 to 7 is where we will start. And here we begin with Caesar Augustus, who of course is the Technically, he is the second Caesar. Julius Caesar is the first. But we all know what happens to him. He is murdered and makes that famous statement, "Et tu, Brute?" as Brutus, who he thought was his friend, also stabs him in the back. Caesar Augustus is the Caesar that immediately follows Julius Caesar. And after the tumultuous reign of Julius Caesar, Caesar Augustus institutes the Pax Romana, otherwise known as 200 years of peace in the Roman Empire. There are no major wars going on at this time. Rather beneficial, as you might imagine, for the spread of Christianity. That Rome sort of rules the world under this government. It institutes a variety of things, including roads and peace and security, thus allowing Christianity to spread. That was not Rome's intent, but those are the circumstances that happened. So Luke chapter 2, we'll read verse 1 and then we'll read verses 1 to 7. In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria, and all went to be registered, each in his own town. Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be registered with Mary his betrothed, who was with child. While they were there, the time came for her to give birth, and she gave birth to her firstborn and wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger because there was no place for them in the inn. So there you have it. This is a kind of truly a God working through Caesar to bring about his purposes. Micah 5 verse 2 tells us that the Messiah, the Savior, will be from Bethlehem. Mary and Joseph do not live in Bethlehem. They live in Galilee, Nazareth, Judea. That is where they live. Joseph is of the house and line of David. His family history traces its roots back to Bethlehem. But Joseph himself does not live there. In fact, possibly the only family he has there may be some distant cousins. It's kind of like a lot of us trace our roots back to Germany. Well, it's not like so if a worldwide census for some reason declared and we all had to go back to Europe, my family would go back to Germany. Well, I don't know anyone in Germany. I've never lived there. I've never been there. My parents have never been there. My grandparents have never been there. Possibly great-grandparents were there. But we've been gone a long time. We don't really know anyone there. Do we have relation there? Well, it's quite possible we do. Some very distant cousins. But that's kind of what Bethlehem is to Joseph. Now, he's not living, the Atlantic does not separate him from Bethlehem. So it is possible that he has been back. They surely did other censuses, and maybe he went back for those. But it's not a regular trip. It's certainly not a trip you would plan when your wife is pregnant. That would really slow things down. It's not walking or riding a donkey to Bethlehem is not a comfortable journey. It's not really something you want to do. But we see that. But how do you get Jesus to be born in Bethlehem if his parents aren't living there and they have no reason to go there and no reason to want to go there? I mean, Bethlehem is not Disney World. So we see here that Caesar, so on the surface this looks like Caesar issuing a decree to do a worldwide census. Why would you want to do a census? So you know how much to tax in the area. We are just completing a census in this country for the purpose of taxation, for the purpose of schools and hospitals and funding. and roads and all this other stuff, and for the purpose of records and data and statistics and all this stuff we can study and try to explain to each other. Well, that's why they're doing a census here, because they want to get information. What a coincidence that the census is issued and called for while Mary is expecting Jesus. We think, well, that's quite a coincidence. Well, that is God working through Caesar. Caesar here has a role in things going on. We see this today in our own lives. Try to think of an example here. Well, let's take the interstate. I was listening to a podcast yesterday talking about railroads. Talking about the early history of the Missouri Synod and the effect railroads had on it. And how all of a sudden you're now moving around a lot more. And this affects the work of the church. The interstate affects the work of the church. Where do you build churches? Where do communities more naturally form? Well, they form close to modes of transportation, such as railroads, such as interstates. And they move away from those areas that are less accessible by easy transportation. So we see the government there has an influence on us, has an effect on us. The current teachings in public schools and some of what they are teaching regarding sexuality, regarding relations, regarding creation, regarding science, some of this may be a blessing to our Lutheran schools as parents seek to pull their children out of the public schools. So we see this kind of having an effect. That society does these things without even thinking, does them for their own benefits and purposes. And then the church sort of takes advantage of these opportunities. Caesar probably thought this was a good time to take a census. And he wasn't really thinking about Micah 5 or any of the other Old Testament prophecies concerning the Christ child when he did it. And yet, Augustus issues the census, and lo and behold, that gets Mary and Joseph off their butts in Galilee, and they go to Bethlehem. It's interesting, Gabriel never tells Mary or Joseph, go to Bethlehem just to fulfill this prophecy. Why don't you go on vacation, stay there a couple months? No, it is a census that makes this happen. Maybe Mary and Joseph weren't even thinking about the prophecy from Micah 5 that the child was to be born in Bethlehem. But God works through the leaders, pagan leaders, let's not kid ourselves on the Caesars here either, the pagan leaders, and gets them to act and work in ways that fulfill God's purposes. Alright, so we are going to now turn our attention from Luke 2 to John chapter 19. John 19 is 2 books over. John chapter 19 verses 12 through 16. John 19, 12 to 16. Let's read it. From then on, Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, "If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar." So when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Stone Pavement, and in Aramaic, Gabbatha. Now it was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about the 6th hour. He said to the Jews, "Behold your king." They cried out, away with him, crucify him." Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." So he delivered him over to them to be crucified. It's interesting here. Pilate is a the true definition of an impartial judge. He does not care one way or the other what happens to Jesus. As if he releases Jesus, great. He would actually love to do that because it would make the Jews angry. And he doesn't really care for the Jews, so why not make them angry and sort of toy with them a little more? If he crucifies Jesus, Pilate doesn't care about that either. It'll make the Jews happy, and that'll shut them up for a while, and it will, put this problem to rest. And then Pilate can go back to doing whatever he wants. So Pilate is the ultimate impartial judge here. And so during the trial of Jesus, Pilate actually finds out, hey, Jesus is innocent. He's not guilty. The Pharisees, the chief priests, the scribes, they're ridiculous. These charges are ridiculous. This isn't a death sentence. Pilate discovers this and he says, hey, I'm going to release you. He's going to release him because there's no evidence, there's no charge against him. So why even bother with this? And he's not guilty anyway. So this is the determination Pilate has arrived at. That there is no evidence, there is no case, and this will make the Jews mad, which will make Pilate happy. So Pilate is perfectly willing and ready to release Jesus. The Jews, those in the crowd, make a very interesting claim here. The first is in verse 12. If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar. And then at the end, in verse 15, the chief priests say, we have no king but Caesar. That's interesting because Caesar, in this case it's Tiberius Caesar in these situations, Tiberius Caesar, like all the Caesars, set himself up to be a god. There's kind of an instance with Caesar that we skipped over. It's in Matthew 15, I believe, where Caesar they bring the coin with Caesar's image on it. And for the Jews to have that is an abomination because a Caesar is claiming to be a god. And that they have a coin with Caesar's image on it says they are walking around with a face of a foreign pagan god in their pocket. They are claiming that god as their own. And they're doing the same thing here. All of a sudden they have a use for Caesar. Prior to this they hate Caesar. They don't want anything to do with Caesar. He's interrupting their lives. He's being a pain. He's a pagan. He's preventing worship. He has done unholy things in the temple through his surrogates. So they really don't like Caesar until today, when all of a sudden Caesar serves their purposes. Because what would this claim about Caesar mean to Pilate? This claim here, these claims are really meant to remind Pilate that, hey, we don't know what we're going to do here. We might go crazy. We might riot. We might start a civil war. We might take a few Roman soldiers out with us in the process. You don't want that getting back to Caesar, do you? What would Tiberius think if he heard reports of an uprising in Jerusalem? What would he think about Pilate? So they scare Pilate into acting here. They make him nervous. They make him nervous that he's going to get a bad report, and then he's going to get assigned to an even more remote, more ridiculous outpost than Jerusalem. This is not the plum assignment here. This is where you put people that annoy you and get in your hair and you want to get out of your life. That's what you put here in these cities, in Jerusalem. So that's why Pilate's in Jerusalem. And he's worried that if a bad report gets back to Caesar, that he's going to end up in an even further out place. He's going to wind up in outer Mongolia, serving an outpost out there if the bad reports about him get back to Rome and to Caesar. So they're using a scare tactic here by invoking the name of Caesar. So Caesar is the background character here, the player, the one moving the strings, in that, hey, you don't want Caesar to find out what you're doing, because then Caesar might move you out of here and put you in the real boondocks. And it works. This threat of appealing to Caesar, this threat of uprising, causes Pilate to think, I'd really like to release him and get at the Jews, but it's just not worth it. Just go crucify him and get him out of here. So that is Pilate's ultimate decision, is that he has Jesus crucified because he fears word getting back to Caesar. Now, in the long run, eventually Pilate is recalled, and then other governors are recalled as well, or shifted in and out. And then, of course, in 70 AD, Caesar is just tired of Jerusalem and the Jews uprising and fighting all the time, and so Jerusalem is destroyed. But we do see here that Jesus is crucified because Pilate fears what Caesar might do. So we're going to look at one more example here, Acts chapter 25. Acts chapter 25, verses 1 through 12. Acts 25, 1 to 12. A little bit longer, so we will take a moment and read it. Now 3 days after Festus had arrived in the province, he went up to Jerusalem from Caesarea. And the chief priests and the principal men of the Jews laid out their case against Paul, and they urged him, asking a favor against Paul, that he summon him to Jerusalem, because they were planning an ambush to kill him on the way. Festus replied that Paul was being kept at Caesarea, and that he himself intended to go there shortly. So, said he, let the men of authority among you go down with me. If there's anything wrong about the man, let them bring charges against him. After he stayed among them not more than 8 or 10 days, he went down to Caesarea, and the next day he took his seat on the tribunal, and ordered Paul to be brought. When he had arrived, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him, bringing many and serious charges against him that they could not prove. Paul argued in his defense, neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I committed any offense. But Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul, do you wish to go up to Jerusalem and be tried there on these charges before me? But Paul said, I am standing before Caesar's tribunal, where I ought to be tried. To the Jews I have done no wrong, as you yourself know very well. If then I am a wrongdoer and have committed anything for which I deserve to die, I do not seek to escape death. But if there is nothing to their charges against me, no one can give me up to them. I appeal to Caesar. Then Festus, when he had conferred with his council, answered, to Caesar you have appealed, to Caesar you shall go. This is kind of a extended story here in Acts. It goes on for several chapters. I believe it starts in chapter 24. Let me just check that real quick. Actually, it starts even further back than that. Maybe 22 or 23. But Paul Lee is accused of... Basically, he leaves Ephesus, he comes back to Jerusalem, and he is accused of bringing a Gentile into the temple, into the inner part of the temple. And this charge is a serious charge if it was true, but it's not true, of course. The Jews are just trying to get rid of Paul. So they bring this charge against Paul, and then Paul is in prison, and he's in prison really for the rest of the book of Acts. Excuse me. So they bring this charge against him that he has brought a Gentile into the inner part of the temple, desecrating the temple. Serious charge for the Jews. The Romans obviously don't really care. And then he bounces around. There are a couple of different governors at the time. There's Felix. Now this is Festus. There's one more after this. Well, maybe it's... there's one more situation after this. Oh, Agrippa. Agrippa also comes and he hears Paul's case. And actually with Agrippa and Bernice, which is the next section in chapter 25, they even admit that Paul is innocent and should be set free. But because of what he does here in verse 11, appealing to Caesar, they are kind of bound to send him to Caesar. So anyway, the Jews want to kill Paul by ambush, and the easiest way to do that would be a prison transfer, and that's why they want him brought to Jerusalem. They don't really want to bring him to Jerusalem, they just want him out in the open where they can kill him on the way. If they can do that, then they will, they'll be happy. So the Jews really want to kill Paul. And that's their desire here. Festus, as with Felix, as with, likely Agrippa, knows Paul is innocent, but doesn't have the guts to release him. Again, same as we saw with Pilate, the Jews would send reports back to Rome, others would bring reports back to Rome, and if there were reports of a lot of uprisings, a lot of conflicts with soldiers having to go in and break up melees and riots and whatnot, that's not going to reflect well on the governor. And so the governor then is responsible for the governor is responsible, and they are going to look at the governor and say, hey, why are you allowing this to happen? So Felix and Festus and Agrippa, they don't want that mark on them. So while they always want to release Paul, Felix actually Felix actually even as so much as enjoys talking to Paul and likes hearing what he has to say. None of them can ever really pull the trigger. So there's that aspect of, again, they're having the same fear that Pilate has. But then there's another aspect here, Paul's Roman citizenship. If you were a Roman citizen, you could pull a trump card and put it on the table and say, if you thought you were getting an unfair trial, if you thought you'd had a better odds going to Caesar, you could just pull this card, put it on the table and say, I appeal to Caesar. Your trial stops. And then you go to Rome and you appeal your trial to Caesar himself. Roman citizens could do this. Not everyone could do this. But Paul has that Roman citizenship, and he can do it. It's almost as though you are accused of a crime, and you can say, a jury of my peers, or I'm going to pull a card, and because I am a U.S. citizen by birth, I appeal to the president. And, then your trial stops, you go to the president, you go to the White House, and plead your case. And then the president says, guilty, not guilty, why are you bothering me? So Paul has that card that he can pull. And he does pull it here. He does not think he knows he's not getting a fair trial. He knows Festus doesn't have it in him to actually release Paul. So Paul finally just says, I appeal to Caesar. So Caesar has this judge, jury, executioner role that plays a factor here in Paul's trial. That Paul can just pull this card out and say, let's go to Rome. And then it happens. Interesting, how does this advance, the gospel? How does this advance the message? How does this benefit the work of the church? Well, the book of Romans is written as an introductory letter to the church at Rome. Not so much that Paul is going to go there and start churches, but more so that Paul is going to go to Rome as a springboard to go to Spain. That's what Paul really wants, is to go to Spain. So this is a means of Paul getting to Rome, which puts him closer to getting to Spain. Paul's missionary journeys have taken him all over the place. He's been up, he's been down, he's been east, west, north, south, and all directions in between. He's never really gotten to Rome yet. It's his intent. He wants to go there. But the Holy Spirit keeps changing his plans. So this serves as an opportunity for Paul to finally get to Rome. Now what happens when he gets to Rome? Well, that's kind of where the book of Acts drops off. He gets to Rome, he's in Rome, and then that's the last we hear of him. We know Peter is also in Rome. There's a very likely possibility that Peter and Rome are killed by Nero after the Great Fire of Rome in 68 AD, which is actually kind of ironic when you consider Paul's appeal here. He says, I appeal to Caesar. Who's he appealing to? Nero. Nero is the Caesar that Paul would hear Paul's case. Kind of ironic that the one Paul appeals to is the one that quite likely played a role in Paul's death. Now that's not guaranteed. Persecution don't really take a lot of time to identify all the victims. So if Paul survived, then possibly he did continue on and maybe he did get to Spain. But his appeal to Caesar has the opportunity of getting him to Rome, kind of moving and advancing the gospel message along. Now, and we know that from our readings of Acts and some of the epistles, that when he's in Rome, Paul actually is he's more under house arrest than, or maybe even a don't leave town. Kind of today we would say he has an ankle monitor on him. They're monitoring him, but he's free to move about and do things and see people and all that. So inadvertently, by going to Rome, by exercising this option in his citizenship, Caesar inadvertently brings Paul to Rome, where Paul then spreads the gospel. So we see Caesar has no official lines. He doesn't have a speaking role in the New Testament. But he does play a role. He is sort of that behind-the-scenes, shadowy figure that has an influence on the events. But does he? That's another aspect here, is it's not Caesar controlling the events. Yes, Augustus issues the census decree. Yes, Tiberius assigns governors. Yes, Nero will hear the case of Paul, possibly. But it's God who is in charge. It is God who raises up Caesar Augustus and the Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, that allows for this time of peace and the spreading of the gospel. It is Paul that raises up Tiberius Caesar, who appoints Pontius Pilate, that spineless governor who cannot release Jesus. It is God who arranges for Paul to be born, untimely born, as Paul himself would put it, so that he might be born a Roman citizen, so that when arrested and on trial and standing before Festus, Paul might say, I appeal to Caesar. And Festus will say, to Caesar you have appealed, to Caesar you shall go. Caesar is the unspoken actor throughout the New Testament, influencing events, but who is the ultimate unspoken actor who influences events? It is God himself. But of course, God himself is not the unspoken actor. Christ Jesus is the Word made flesh who came and dwelt among us. who redeems us, who saves us, who works through many and various means, Caesar, presidents, our own random course of events that are flowing about us, to bring about His will, His purpose, and to advance His mission, His kingdom, His will. So we see the Caesars as these unspoken characters. We rejoice that they are controlled by the spoken character, the Word made flesh, Christ Jesus Himself. Thanks for taking time to join us for Bible study today. We hope you enjoyed this, and if you have thoughts or comments, feel free to send them along to me, and I will answer them as we can see fit. Feel free to keep passing along your suggestions, and we'll take note of them and hopefully use them in an upcoming study. We've got a couple more weeks to go before Thanksgiving, and we will keep doing these Bible studies at least 2 more weeks, maybe 3 more weeks. And then we will see where it goes from there. May the Lord bless your day and enjoy the rest of it.